Hello everyone, we are the Whispers, and this is how to play Artificer in Risk of Rain Returns. This intends to be a comprehensive guide covering how to unlock and effectively use the character, and this time we're just going to get straight into it. Unlocking Artificer is a simple enough task, you just need to reach 10 unique stages. Personally, for new players, I recommend doing this under normal settings as you'll have to learn to clear some stages and beat some bosses to pull it off, but as usual it's fairly easy to cheese this by changing your damage dealt and damage taken. For her primary fire, Artificer has flame chakrams. They get thrown out from you and hover in place in a sort of sweet spot, slicing anything that comes through them while also applying stacks of ignite, before eventually coming back to you. The throw and return also do light damage, and with their main damage and stacking damage over time, these can quickly melt through enemies, but they don't stagger, so enemies will often just walk right through them, taking some hits but not nearly the full damage possible. And that's where a lot of people's struggles with Artificer start. But it's also where your other abilities come in to help. Artificer's second ability is Charged Nanobomb. You charge and throw a ball of electricity at enemies that explodes on contact, damaging and stunning all enemies caught in the blast for a considerable duration. A quick note, the charge level doesn't seem to affect the stun duration, so if you find yourself needing some room to breathe, don't hesitate to throw a mini uncharged nanobomb just to stun an enemy, giving you the chance to escape or follow up by shredding them with your chakrams while they can't move out of the sweet spot. Next, Artificer's third ability is Frost Barrier. Activating it will summon an ice column that attracts all nearby enemies, taking their aggro off of you. And when they eventually break it, the column explodes, freezing all enemies nearby, which again opens them up to follow-ups from your other abilities. It also inherits your max health, which automatically makes health boosting items better for Artificers running this ability, but we'll talk more on that later. Last, Artificer has Flamethrower. Pretty self-explanatory. When the damage from the fancy flame chakrams isn't quite enough, just incinerate everything in front of you. You hover in the air with the ability to slowly move forward or back while unleashing a large stream of flame. The hover can be handy for crossing small gaps, and of course the damage is perfect for atomizing large groups that you just locked down. Or a poor unsuspecting magma worm in stage 1 that will never see its family again. It can be cancelled at any time, and while it does huge damage, it does leave you vulnerable. Personally, if I'm torching a crowd, I cancel and run as soon as I start taking damage so I have a chance to react and get away, since usually that first tick of damage means some much larger hits are on their way, and I need to move. Using these abilities in conjunction, Artificer excels in grouping up enemies with attacks that serve to both soften them up and position them perfectly to be torn apart by your much higher damaging abilities. The damage potential of Chakram and Flamethrower are incredibly high, but they can be difficult to use safely, which is what seems to cause a lot of people trouble, so here's some tips for that. 1. Like I said before, use mini nanobombs. An emergency stun can be a really helpful way of staying alive or keeping enemies grouped together. Next, if you're being tailed by a crowd or even just a strong enemy you struggle to deal with, keep running forward, throw up an ice wall, and then run past it, where the enemy will then focus on it, giving you a perfect chance to use your chakrams. Be careful with things like wisps though, because their attacks do reach past the barrier. Third, if you're like me and use the accessibility setting that lets you hold your fire key for full auto, you may not realize this. Gods know I went too long before learning it. But you can spam click chakrams to fire way faster. In fact, it's about as fast as you can click. Without this, their damage can feel even more difficult to get the most of, but with it you can dump all 4 blades into one spot and watch a stone golem's health melt. You've undoubtedly seen me do this a ton in the background footage, but it's such a huge yet easy to miss thing that it was still worth mentioning explicitly. Lastly, and most importantly, just like Engineer, you can't just sit still even if your abilities seem to allow for it on paper. Even with Enforcer, that's just not the kind of game Risk of Rain is. Your control abilities are only half of the equation, and pairing them with proper movement is what makes them work. For example, earlier I mentioned running past your own ice wall. That detail is important because if you don't run past it, the enemy isn't likely to run past you to get to it, it's just gonna rip your face off. So pair your control abilities with your movement to better manipulate the enemy's behavior and put them where you want them. Artificer has ults for her second, third, and fourth ability. They can all be acquired through Providence trials, and I do suggest doing them this way as her trials do a solid job of getting you used to the controls for each of them. For ult 2, Charged Nanobomb becomes Pulse Spear. It's acquired from the trial Lightning Strikes Twice, where you use the ability in tandem with your own movement to hit enemies on the platform below. Activating it fires an electric projectile that will hit and stun enemies, however during its flight, you can hit the ability again to pulse the projectile. This gives it the ability to pierce enemies during that pulse and keep going. The spear travels through terrain on its own, but pulsing it without enemies to hit will cause it to end, while timing it correctly will allow you to pulse it again, theoretically across the entire map if you so chose. Next, Frost Barrier turns into Tectonic Surge. Finally, a movement option. This ability lets you use the earth beneath you to launch into the sky, reducing your gravity briefly to let you float about. Used midair, this creates a temporary platform you can land back on briefly. Additionally, while you're sacrificing your ability to pull enemy aggro, you stun enemies that you pass through when launched through the air. It comes from the trial In the Clouds, where you use the ability to ascend a tower. It can be tricky, but it does a great job of getting you used to controlling this properly. Personally, I used this side path to beat it, which is normally how you would get the gold time. I recommend using your Flamethrower's hover every now and then to help you cross certain gaps. Last, Flamethrower is replaced by Localized Sun. You create a remote bomb of fire that moves based on your movement, dealing contact damage to enemies until it explodes 5 seconds later. It's acquired from Danger Orbits. In this trial, you're confined to a box where jellyfish spawn from all sides to attack you. Huge tip, zoom out in your menu if you can. It makes a massive difference in how soon you can see the enemies coming. Zoomed in, I was struggling with this, and then I beat it with ease on my first attempt zoomed out. Combined, these abilities give you the option of being more mobile and striking from further away consistently, while sacrificing your control options and with them your safety up close. If you're having difficulty getting used to Artificer, the alt kit can actually be really helpful for bridging that gap using some other viable options. Just swapping Frost Barrier for Tectonic can help Artie feel a lot better to people who are unfamiliar with this control archetype playstyle, so I absolutely recommend experimenting as always. Personally, I run a loadout of Pulse Spear because I think it's better at shredding crowds, Frost Barrier, and Flamethrower to keep me safe up close, since personally I find the controls for Localized Sun to be a little bit wonky. Alright, you know this is serious because I'm doing it out of order. Today we're starting with the equipment. 2 words, gang. Safeguard Lantern. Wait, is there a hyphen in Safeguard? Is that 3 words? Safeguard Lantern. Artie struggles to keep enemies out of her space because her primary has no stagger at all on its own. This lets you effectively put down a wall that enemies can't cross and damages them as well. Crudely Drawn Buddy can be used the same way as a retreating ice wall. Unstable Watch is also very good and my favorite for Acrid. Shield Generator for on-demand invulnerability is hard to complain about, but damn, Safeguard has saved me many times and it pairs very well with her base kit. So does Crudely Drawn Buddy. Definitely give both of them a try. Okay, now back to our normal order. Since Frost Barrier inherits your max health, Bitterroot is pretty great to snag a few of, but I don't particularly recommend building up your Artificer with items to max her tankiness herself. The barrier is meant to be taking those hits for you, so also consider things like Hermit's Scarf. If you slip up and take a hit here and there, you've got a chance to dodge it, which can help a lot. Fire Speed can be very helpful because it makes it easier to land all of the damage from Chakrams and Flamethrower, and it also improves the charge speed of Nanobomb. Overall, it does a lot, and movement speed seriously helps Artie feel better to play. So Mocha, and of course Syringe and Goathoof, since they all do the same thing, can make your runs feel much better. Backup Mag also does spectacularly because having an extra bomb or spear in reserve makes emergency getaways much easier without worrying about if you'll have another bomb or spear on hand when you need it. In green, Infusion is an obvious choice for the same reason as Bitterroot. Popo Feather and Red Whip can help with that limited mobility, and Prophet's Cape is nice for the same reason as Hermit's Scarf. I think it's also good to mention here that even though I'm not listing them all out, pretty much all the on-hit items perform great with Artificer. Even more so when running Flamethrower, and especially if you have attack speed boosts. In red, Permafrost helps with easier crowd control. Hardlight Afterburner is amazing regardless of if you're running Frost Barrier or Tectonic. And Alien Head feels great. It speeds your cooldowns up just enough to get rid of those moments where you feel caught out without an ability that you need. Shattering Justice is also pretty great on account of how easily Chakrams proc it on their own. For gold, I would say Colossal Knurl for its health boost to improve Frost Barrier, but a lot of its effects like the improved regen and armor go to waste when you're playing Artie and trying to primarily avoid getting hit in the first place. Not that it's bad, no one dislikes free health, regen, and armor, but I do think Imp Overlord's Tentacle is pretty nice on account of enemies occasionally targeting it, so it can keep a bit of heat off of you. And of course, the on-hits, because again, pretty much all of the on-hits in every category are good for Artie, and honestly, almost more so for a lot of the on-kills. That's all for this one. Next up is Loader, since that was the second place winner from our last poll, and wow, we're already nearly done with the cast. And what a ride it's been, huh? Our pilot video single-handedly launched the channel into the YouTube Partner Program. and a really good number of you have stuck around and become regular faces here in the comments. I'm really happy you've been enjoying these. I have another non-Risk of Rain video coming up next that I think you're going to love, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Till then, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope to see you again very soon.